Hello, welcome to Romance Book Monsters. I am Kitty Boom, and this is my co-host Lollipop. How's it going?
It's going well. All this warm weather, this 80s. It's amazing. It's
I
cold in the morning though.
waited the year.
Right, because it's fall. I'm like, what's going on here? But I'll take it. I'll take it.
Right? Now, what did you think about this week's reading? So this week we are reviewing Jane Eyre, a Prince book. I have not read like a new book in her so long, and the name of the book is called Promise Not to Tell. And it's really it has that cult theme, and that's like kind of like a new thing that I'm finding like weaved into like current books that I'm reading, and it's always like very interesting when it has that like side to it.
Mm-hmm.
So the main characters in this book, as you know, it's Virginia, and then there's Cabot, and they have a shared experience of they were both in a cult as children, and they survived a fire of a barn that they were locked into. The cult leader decided he was gonna like wash his hands of the whole like endeavor, like he was a serious crook. And so he like set the whole compound on fire before he goes to disappear. And he supposedly died in a boat fire. So they think he's dead, but no, there's a series of events happens with Virginia's business and her with a former client. In the current time, it's like 20 years later. She's 28. She was 8 at the time it happened. So they're led to believe that the cult leader is alive, and he's like searching for this key. And they don't know what the key is, and they don't know what it's to, at least at the beginning of the book. But as they get like further into the book, they figure out that it's to money that their mothers like siphon off to like get control of the children. So that was an interesting take too that I've never seen before in like a cult themed book where the ladies kind of try to overthrow the cult leader.
Mm-hmm.
So that was interesting. What do you think?
I would have to agree. I did like the fact that the ladies, even though they were stuck in this horrible position, the cult leader was using their children as leverage. And the craziness was that everybody pretty much thought he had killed their husbands. And then that's how he was able to even get them into the cult. And he was going after people for certain purposes. It wasn't just like any old random person because he was a con artist. So Virginia's mother was the bookkeeper. Like
Right.
He purposely went after her because that is what she did versus Cobalt's mother who did something else, and the different children and how all their fathers died in like car accidents or by fire or strange occurrences. It wasn't anywhere, at least the ones that were mentioned, it was not anything that was natural, to say the least.
It's like so much work when you like think of like a cult like outside of the book.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they find people, but they didn't have to kill anybody to actually get the people. But I guess since he was fishing for like particular roles that he needed to fill, that's how that happened.
Well, he likes to destroy all his evidence, and by getting rid of the people, he gets rid of the evidence.
Yeah, and every time I read a Jane Eyre book, usually her books they take place in Seattle, and it always makes me want to plan a trip to Seattle every time I read a Jane Eyre Prince book.
Listen, I like Seattle. It was beautiful when I went there. I'm not gonna lie, it was great, all that stuff. But they got a homeless problem, like it's not even it's going out of style. Like the homeless people were everywhere.
But I mean, that's something you deal with all like the big cities, anyways. Is it worse than New York City?
Girl?
Really?
Yes. At least in New York City, I'm not tripping over them. They there, but they not there. In Seattle, they were like, you could not go to the park without seeing. We went to the park because we met at the park for a walking tour. And there was more homeless people at the park than in our walking tour.
Wow.
The homeless population, Seattle's home issues right now for housing is extreme. Like, it's bad in New York, but it is bad in Seattle and parts of California. Like, it is really bad. It is horrifically bad.
Okay, we're not gonna take you through a segue of this. We're gonna get back to Jane.
But yeah, no, Seattle is great. The food is great. I love Seattle. It's a great setting for sure. I wonder if she lives in Seattle. Because it seems like a lot of her books are Pacific Northwest.
Mm-hmm. And definitely I thought this book had like her typical kind of like quirkiest characters.
Mm-hmm.
Characters, they always seem to have like some type of like quirk. And with these, they have their different anxieties and they're waking up at a certain time in the morning and just like specific things that they just don't like and are not like here for.
I would agree. Her later characters for sure. Especially more of her mystery romance, like that she's been doing for the last, I would say 10 years or so. Like obviously her earlier books, like her Harlequins and stuff like that like the thicker Harlequins, not the Presents or anything like that. Those characters were more contemporary, mainstream, because I love some of those books too, but definitely her more novel style books for sure has definitely been unique, quirky characters, interesting themes, different types of themes. She's really played into different areas, whether it's more of that mystery contemporary versus fantasy with witches and things like she's definitely played around with a lot of different niches within the romance genre as a whole, and I love it because it keeps her writing fresh to me.
It does. Like, I love the one. Well, she did 2 books in this little series. I think one was called like Illusion of Light, where the character was an interior designer psychic. Like, she felt emotions from, and that's like, that was just like so interesting.
Right. I don't think I've read that one. And it's so funny too, because I'm thinking here, I look over to my bookshelf and I look at my long list of Jane Eyre Crins, from her historicals to her contemporaries, and to her mysteries, and I love them all. Like, I love them all.
Yes, I love them all too. And speaking of quirky, in this book, I love the neighbor as like a little side character, because when the neighbor with Victoria, when she takes Cabot to her apartment, neighbor comes out and she's just like this little old lady, and she's like, "How are you doing, dear?" She's like, "Oh, this man doesn't look like the usual man that you bring back," because I guess she usually like dates like artists.
Yeah.
Like the usual man. And she's like, "Oh, he's a private investigator." And she's like, "Ooh, a man with a steady job and benefits." I was like, "Oh my gosh, hilarious."
She was like, "You could have left your key with me. You didn't have to have no rando coming into your apartment to do work." And she's like, "Do work? I wouldn't have nobody here." So yeah.
Right. Definitely. If it wasn't for that neighbor, they would not have known that they really should have been like keeping an eye open for like somebody looking at Victoria. She was like, "Who's that going into your house?"
Well, until they broke into her art studio. Yeah.
But yes, I thought the old lady neighbor was like hilarious. She's like, "Ooh, does he have benefits with his job?"
Yeah, she was pretty funny. I did like her a lot. She was only in it for a minute, but that minute was memorable.
I like really wish she would have like came back in there as something.
Especially since they spent a lot of time at her apartment.
They did. Like, he never went home.
Not really. Not since he moved, because she had a little 2-bedroom. And they love to say how tiny it is, but I'm like, can't be that tiny. It got 2 bedrooms.
And for a while, when they first started sleeping together, I was like, it's so just like quirky and weird that y'all not sleeping in the same bed together.
Well, people with sleep issues do not sleep in the bed together.
Like I say, with their issues, I'm sure that's probably why it took a while for them to, come together.
I would agree.
And they were perfectly together as a couple. Like, sometimes, you have the theme where like one partner in the relationship has been traumatized and the other like helps like stabilize them and support system. But in this one, they both went through the same thing and they have some of like the same issues.
Mm-hmm.
Really worked really well in the book because they had an understanding and they weren't looking at each other as if it was weird, which
Right.
how it would have looked if it was a person who had not gone through that. So they
I would
worked
agree.
well as a couple.
I would agree. And also, I do feel that he had certain strengths where she didn't, where she lacked, where he could talk her through. And it could be because he was a former police officer, the private eye. Like, it was just, he was able to talk her through it in a way by asking the right questions to lead her to express her emotions and what she's feeling and going through so that she can really realize and understand why she's reacting the way she's reacting in certain things.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, wasn't his family ridiculous? Now in the book, so after they were rescued from the fire, all the children were rescued from the fire, but all the adults they like were killed in the
The
fire.
mothers were all killed, yeah.
So mostly everybody had parents or family that came and got them after the place was burned down. Virginia, she goes with her grandmother, but Cabot and two of the other kids, they were adopted by the
Firefighter.
yeah, no, by the town sheriff.
He was a sheriff? I thought he was a firefighter. He was a sheriff? Okay.
He was the sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were adopted by him. But his family, he came from a family of millionaires. I mean, at the very least, they could have took him in and they had money to just hire a nanny to raise him until he was 18 and like send him out in the world. But they let him go into foster care.
Yeah, because they were trifling.
It was
The grandfather was trifling. The uncle was trifling.
Yes.
Because those are the two main ones discussed in the book. So we don't know about any of the family, but the uncle was a low down dirty dog.
They trying to cheat him out of his inheritance.
Right. Oh, sign this thing to get $25,000. Get the hell out of here.
Your way, yeah.
Like, I'm gonna sign anything from y'all without having my lawyer look at it. Quit playing. Y'all evil people.
Yes, they were.
His little cousin was so cute. His little 17-year-old cousin to show up.
Yes, well, the cousin comes to town like, oh, I want to get to know my big cousin Cabot.
Exactly. Because I think he was more into the fact that he was a private eye and his life was exciting and all of that. It
reminds me very much of the book that Jane Ann did called Trust Me. Because with that one, his two little brothers from his father's other marriage came to Seattle on a bus from wherever they live.
I feel like I read this book. It sounds real familiar.
They wanted to get to know their big brother because their daddy was a ridiculous man who was leaving his mama for a younger woman.
Oh, I did read this. And as we say, Jane Ann always delivers.
Yeah, so it kind of reminded me of that. And the cousin, they like hire him as their apprentice and he like tracks down who's been tracking her by her cell phone. And I was on pins and needles when he had her cell phone and he was like going through the houses trying to figure out where the signal that was tracking her was coming from. And he actually goes into the house with the person, with the killer.
Because he's an idiot, but he's also 17, so.
But my gosh, still, I mean.
No self-preservation.
No, not at all.
A completely sheltered 17-year-old. He don't know no different. He thought he was doing good.
Like, I'm going to maneuver my way. I'm just saying I'm lost. Not thinking that, that cell phone could be pinging him saying it's approaching his house.
Exactly.
So I was really afraid he was going to get murdered. So I
was too. I was like, ooh, boy, they going to come after him now, that family.
I was getting ready to shed a tear.
I knew she wasn't going to kill him.
You never know. Nah. You hope that they won't. So I was very happy that they did not kill him.
I would agree. So, from my standpoint, I really liked the book. I enjoyed it. I was talking to Kitty before we started recording about I felt Cobalt as a character. Like, I knew his motivations. I understood his his background, his upbringing, the way he dealt with his trauma and how he had someone to talk to in his adopted father, in his brothers. It was never, a taboo topic. And I felt like with Virginia, I didn't have that same kind of feel for her character because, I mean, she talked about how her grandmother just wanted her to forget it. She talked about how her therapist, the different therapists that she went to, never really helped her. But like, outside of her anxiety attacks and her nightmares, she didn't talk about anything about what she did to help deal with some of this stuff. And I just, to me, and it could be just because she was the main voice of the story, I just expected to understand more of how she dealt with things moving as an adult, or maybe she did mention that she just tried to ignore it after a certain age. I don't remember. It wasn't something that stood out to me, but it definitely, to me, was very apparent from Cobalt and his story and understanding what he did and his life, even though, yes, they both are the same amount of traumatized. There's no different about it because they both have nightmares. They're both waking up at the same time every night. She also has anxiety attacks that he does not, but that was caused by, something else. So, but from a character perspective, I just felt more for Cobalt's character than I did Virginia, even though she was supposed to be the main voice.
But you know what else? Like, at 8, like you said, her grandmother told her, like, don't think about it anymore, like, move on from it. Whereas Cabot and his family, like, their adopted dad was the sheriff of that case at the time. And, all these years, they have been under the assumption that the cult leader was still alive and it had an open case for them. So they never stopped talking about it. So they've always been analyzing it and his situation over the years too. I think that may have had something to do with, how they processed it also.
I mean, I'm sure it did. And, with her too, her guilt of thinking that she was the reason her grandparents' marriage broke up and all these different things. So yeah, there was a lot of that too. I don't know. And this could just be me personally, I just felt more connected to Cabot, however you want to pronounce his name, as a character than I did Virginia.
Yeah. And you should definitely check out the next book in this series because it's going to be that Last Brothers book. I don't know if I'm going to go back and read the first book in this series. This is the second book in the series. But in the next book, they're going to catch the actual cult leader.
Yeah, they're going to close out the story for sure. I saw that.
Story. And, it just gives you like more in-depth into it. So that was actually a really good read too.
Okay, I might check it out. I added to my list of ever-growing list. My list is too long.
The next book, she is going to be a hypnotist.
Interesting. I hope she hypnotized some other people. All right. Anything else you want to talk about with this book? Oh, well, I'll give it a 4.5. I really enjoyed it. Let me tell you something. About halfway through the book, by the time you reach halfway through the book, I went from reading a little bit every day. I hit that halfway point on a Friday night and stayed up until I finished it. If I had not made it to that, because by the time you hit halfway through the book, you can't put it down because there's so much happening. And you're like, okay, what's happening? What's happening? I was like, oh my God, it's 3:00 in the morning. I could have been asleep.
Technically, we only review like 75% of the book because there's so many like twists and turns that you find out in the last 25% of the book. Like, I don't want to ruin it.
Yeah, there's so much goodness.
But like, oh my God, so many twists and turns. Like some things like you would have never like expected, like going into the book were revealed. So definitely a good book. I give it a 5.
No.
I enjoyed it. So tell
I
us.
enjoyed it as well. I mean, it's just, I keep my fives close to the chest. Close to the chest.
I give him Outwood Earn.
So yeah, definitely. And please make sure when you're about to hit that 50% that you got time to invest. Don't do it like me. 1:00 in the morning, hit 50 and up till 3-4 o'clock in the morning finishing the book. Don't do it. It was worth it, but don't do it.
You're worth it. So, are you a fan of Jane Ann Krentz? If so, let us know what's your favorite book by her. Do you know any authors that are the same caliber as Jane Ann? If so, share those. Maybe we haven't read them yet and we can get, some new reads in.
For sure, for sure. As I said, let us know, hit that like button, comment, share, subscribe. Let us know in the comments more about, different books that are available that you're currently reading, as well as books you think we would enjoy, because, we're always up for something new and different.
Most definitely. So we will definitely see you later and have a good one.
Stay blessed.